The Galactic Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds, crushed entire civilizations beneath its boots, and rewritten history to place itself at the center of all things. It saw itself as invincible. Humanity, a small and stubborn race at the fringes of a known galaxy, was a mere afterthought. That changed when a single human began carving his legend across the Empire's dominion. They called him many things: a ghost, a monster, a myth. But one name stuck: Baba Yaga. He moved like a shadow through Imperial space, striking military outposts, assassinating high-ranking officials, and dismantling supply chains with surgical precision. Every attempt to capture or kill him ended the same way. Bodies left in gruesome displays, messages scrawled in the blood of Imperial officers, entire squads vanishing without a trace. The Empire had fought brutal enemies before, but this was different. Baba Yaga wasn't an army, a rebellion, or a resistance movement. He was one man, and somehow he was winning. The Emperor's patience wore thin. He summoned Commander Varric Kane, a soldier who had built his reputation through ruthless efficiency, his victories measured in the bodies of those who defied Imperial rule. Kane was no stranger to impossible missions. His unit, the Void Reapers, had eradicated insurgencies, put down planetary revolts, and executed classified extermination orders with unwavering precision. He had never failed. The briefing was simple: find Baba Yaga and eliminate him. Kane studied the reports in silence, his gaze cold and calculating. The images showed devastation: outposts reduced to smoldering wreckage, elite soldiers gutted with expert precision, their armor carved open like paper. The psychological effect was undeniable. The surviving troops refused to speak his name. Some turned their weapons on themselves rather than risk facing him. "This is a myth," Kane finally said, placing the reports down. "No single human is capable of this." The Emperor's response was slow and deliberate. "Then prove it." Kane accepted the mission without hesitation. He assembled the best killers the Empire had to offer, men who knew no fear, who had stood against nightmare creatures from the void and laughed as they burned. Among them was Lieutenant Dren Vox, a cybernetically enhanced tracker whose implants allowed him to detect heartbeats through walls. Sergeant Kale, Rowe, an explosives expert who could level entire city blocks with his carefully placed charges. 8 more hand-picked soldiers, hardened by war, chosen for their efficiency and brutality. They traced Baba Yaga to Erebus 9, a dead world once ravaged by war, now little more than abandoned ruins and shifting shadows. It was the perfect battleground for a ghost. The dropship landed in silence, the only sound the low hum of the engines as the team disembarked. The air was thick with the scent of decay and scorched metal. A cold wind howled through skeletal buildings, rattling loose debris like whispered warnings. Kane's grip on his rifle tightened. He had fought in wastelands before, but there was something different about this place. Something wrong. Vox activated his scanners, his augments flaring to life. No movement within a 2-kilometer radius, he reported, voice distorted through his helmet's vocoder. But there's something. Interference. Like we're being watched? Rowe scoffed. This whole planet is a graveyard. Of course we're being watched. They moved forward in tight formation, weapons raised. The ruins loomed around them like the bones of some long-dead beast, jagged and broken. Signs of battle littered the ground: scorched impact craters, rusted remains of Imperial war machines, and bodies that had long since become part of the dust. Then they found it. A pile of corpses stacked deliberately in the center of an open courtyard. Imperial soldiers. Their armor had been carefully arranged, their weapons laid at their sides like offerings to a forgotten god. A message had been carved into the chest plate of the uppermost body, deep gashes forming jagged letters. "Go home." Silence. Then Rowe exhaled sharply, breaking the tension with a forced chuckle. "Dramatic bastard, isn't he?" Kane ignored him, eyes scanning the rooftops, the shadows between buildings. This was a warning, a taunt. Baba Yaga knew they were here. Vox turned sharply, his augments flaring red. Something's wrong. Kane didn't hesitate. Positions. Now. The squad moved with precision, forming a defensive perimeter. The ruins pressed in around them, the wind howling louder. Shadows stretched unnaturally. The feeling of being watched intensified. Then the first scream. It came from a rear. A soldier, his name already forgotten, yanked off his helmet, clawing at his throat as blood poured from his mouth. His eyes were wide with horror as he collapsed, lifeless. No gunfire, no sound of an attack, just death. Then the whispers, faint at first, crawling through their comms like static distorted and warped. A voice low and mocking. You should have stayed home. A blur of movement. A soldier was yanked into the shadows with inhuman speed. His scream was cut short. Blood sprayed across the broken ground. The squad opened fire, but there was nothing to shoot. Just empty space and shifting darkness. Kane's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. Titan formation. Eyes up. Another soldier gone. Then another. The whispers turned into laughter. The squad's gunfire turned frantic, muzzle flashes illuminating empty ruins. Then stillness. They were alone. The bodies of their fallen were gone. No blood. No remains. Just silence. Vox's voice was strained, his cybernetics struggling against whatever interference had taken hold. He's not human. Kane's jaw clenched. He had faced monsters before, horrors that defied logic. But this was something else. Then in the distance, standing atop the ruins, silhouetted against the sickly red sky, Baba Yaga. He did not move, did not speak, just stood there, watching. Kane raised his weapon, but something in him hesitated, an instinct older than training, deeper than logic. The kind of fear that came from knowing you were not the predator. You were the prey. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, pressing against them like a living thing. Baba Yaga remained motionless atop the ruins, his figure barely visible in the shifting haze. Then, without a sound, he was gone. Kane's grip tightened on his rifle. Stay together. No one moves alone. No one responded. The squad was locked in place, scanning the shadows, fingers twitching over their triggers. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying whispers that didn't belong. Something about the planet itself felt wrong, as if it had been tainted by the presence of the specter that haunted them. Then a scream, raw and agonized, cut through the comms. Private Jex! Kane turned in time to see him drag backward into the dark, his boots kicking against the dirt. His hands clawed at the ground, desperate, before a blade flashed and his body jerked violently. His helmet rolled free, stopping at Kane's feet. Jex's face was frozen in horror, his throat sliced open. They opened fire. Gunfire ripped through the ruins, muzzle flashes illuminating fractured stone and empty air. Shadows twisted, flickering between cover, but there was nothing to shoot. The enemy wasn't there. The gunfire faded, leaving only the sound of their ragged breathing. Then a new sound. A slow, wet drip. Kane turned his head. Jex's body dangled upside down from a rusted support beam, throat carved open to the bone. Blood dripped steadily from the tips of his fingers, pooling beneath him. The cuts were precise, deliberate. This wasn't just a kill. It was a message. A crude carving had been etched into his chest plate with something razor-sharp. 3 words, deep and jagged. You should run. Rose swore under his breath. This is a game to him. Kane ignored him. Vox, scan for movement. The lieutenant's cybernetic eyes flickered, processing, searching. His breath hitched. I don't see him. I should, but he hesitated. It's like he isn't real. Kane forced down the frustration burning in his chest. They needed to regain control. He had executed planetary rebellions, crushed entire factions with calculated brutality. He would not be undone by one man. We set a trap, he said, voice iron-hard. We don't run. We draw him out. Rowe glanced at Jex's corpse, then at Kane. That's what he wants. Kane stared back. Then we give it to him. The squad repositioned, weapons trained on the open courtyard where Jex had fallen. Rowe set charges along the perimeter, motion-sensitive explosives designed to tear through heavy armor. The ruins became a kill zone, every corner a potential death trap. The plan was simple. Force Baba Yaga into the open, overwhelm him with firepower, end this nightmare. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. The squad remained in position, nerves stretched thin. Then Vox stiffened. Something's wrong. Kane turned. What? Vox's eyes flickered again, scanning, recalibrating. His breath came faster, more erratic. We're not tracking him. He's tracking us. A single pop echoed through the ruins. Vox jerked violently. A hole the size of a fist exploded through his helmet. He collapsed without a sound. Contact! Someone yelled, but there was nothing to shoot. Kane ducked behind cover, forcing his mind to process. A single shot, precise, undetectable. Baba Yaga had been watching, waiting for them to settle into their trap before striking first. Panic spread through the squad. Another shot rang out, and another soldier dropped, his chest cavity shredded. He's picking us off. Rose's voice was laced with raw fear. We have to move. Kane gritted his teeth. He wasn't used to being outplayed. He wasn't used to losing. Stick to the plan. Then the comms flickered. The voice was distorted, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. You set the trap in the wrong place. A dull beep sounded beneath Kane's boots. His body moved before his mind did, throwing himself back as the charge detonated. Fire erupted through the ruins, the shockwave slamming into him like a hammer. He hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision swimming. Baba Yaga had turned their own explosives against them. Through the haze, he saw Rose scrambling to his feet, staggering. Then a knife bloomed in his throat. The sergeant's body seized, eyes wide in shock as blood bubbled past his lips. He tried to speak, but the words never came. His knees buckled, and he crumpled motionless. Kane forced himself up, heart pounding, fingers clenched around his rifle. 3 men left. 3 against a phantom. No, 2. Another body hit the ground. Kane didn't see the attack, just the aftermath. The look of disbelief frozen on the man's face as his head rolled to the dirt. Then silence. Kane swallowed hard, his breath coming sharp and uneven. He had never been on this side of the hunt before, never felt the weight of being prey. A slow realization settled over him like ice in his veins. Baba Yaga wasn't just killing them. He was dismantling them. Piece by piece, the whispers returned. Closer now. You don't understand, Commander. Kane's finger hovered over the trigger, scanning the ruins, sweat cold against his skin. You think you're here to kill me? A shadow moved at the edge of his vision. He turned, fired. Stone shattered. Nothing there. The voice was behind him now. But I'm here to bury you. The last 2 soldiers died screaming. Kane didn't see how. Didn't hear footsteps. Didn't see movement. Just the brutal efficiency of something far beyond human. Something that had already decided how this night would end. And then Kane was alone. His pulse thundered in his ears. He turned in a slow circle, weapon raised, scanning, waiting. Nothing. His comms crackled. A single transmission. You should have stayed home. Then the signal cut to black. Kane staggered through the ruins, his breath ragged, his armor scorched and cracked from the explosion. The world around him had shrunk to a simple, primal reality: survive or die. The squad was gone. The mission was in ruins. The legend they had come to kill had torn them apart like they were nothing more than insects beneath his boot. The comms were dead, but the silence spoke louder than any distress call ever could. Baba Yaga was still here, watching, waiting. Kane tightened his grip on his rifle, forcing his breathing to steady. He had fought against the horrors of the void, broken worlds with orbital bombardments, and silenced entire resistance cells with the precision of a scalpel. He was a predator. He would not cower. A slow, deliberate sound broke the quiet, a single footstep on loose debris. Kane whipped around, rifle raised. The ruins stretched out before him, broken stone and jagged steel illuminated by the sickly red glow of Erebus 9's dying sky. Nothing moved. Another step. Closer this time. His muscles coiled, finger tightening on the trigger. Then, without warning, a knife whistled through the air. He barely had time to shift before it embedded itself in his shoulder, slicing through armor like it was paper. The force sent him staggering back, teeth clenching against the pain. No hesitation. He fired, sweeping the area with automatic bursts, stone shattering under the onslaught. His mind screamed that this was futile. He was shooting at shadows, at a ghost who had already decided how this would end. A voice, impossibly close, murmured through the dust. Too slow. Kane spun, but it was already too late. A boot slammed into his chest, sending him crashing into the rubble. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, his vision swimming with static. A dark figure loomed above him, silhouetted against the blood-colored sky. Baba Yaga. Not a myth, not a ghost, a man. But Kane understood now why the others had feared him, why the Empire whispered his name like a curse. He was something else entirely. His stance was relaxed, but every line of his body radiated lethal intent. His armor was a patchwork of scavenged pieces, worn but reinforced, built for function over form. His face remained hidden behind a tactical visor, but Kane could feel his gaze, cold, assessing, as if he were already picking apart the best way to kill him. Kane forced himself upright, biting back a groan. Blood leaked from his shoulder, hot and sticky beneath his armor. His mind worked through every possible strategy, every path to survival. He had faced worse. He could still turn this around. You came all this way, Baba Yaga said, his voice almost amused. And for what? Kane gritted his teeth. To end you. Baba Yaga tilted his head slightly. You think you're the first? Kane lunged, pulling a concealed blade from his belt, driving it forward in a brutal arc. It never landed. Baba Yaga caught his wrist with effortless speed, twisting. Bone snapped. White-hot pain lanced through Kane's arm as the blade clattered to the ground. Then a fist hammered into his gut. The world blurred. His knees buckled, bile rising in his throat, but he refused to fall. Another strike, this time to the ribs. A sickening crack. Kane gasped, vision flickering. Baba Yaga stepped closer, voice low. The Empire sends men like you because they think force is enough. That if they just throw enough bodies at the problem, it will go away. A pause. Tell me, Commander, how many have you buried in its name? Kane clenched his jaw, refusing to answer. Baba Yaga didn't need him to. I've seen your work. Whole colonies burned because they wouldn't kneel. Families executed as examples. His tone was calm, almost conversational. Tell me, when you pulled the trigger, did you ever hear them scream? Kane lunged again, more from rage than strategy. Another mistake. Baba Yaga moved like liquid shadow, sidestepping with infuriating ease. His knee shot up, striking Kane's already broken ribs. The agony sent him sprawling, gasping for breath. You've already lost, Baba Yaga said, standing over him. You just haven't realized it yet. Kane forced himself up on shaking arms, refusing to accept those words, refusing to be nothing more than another name on the list of the fallen. His training screamed at him to retreat, to regroup, but his pride refused to allow it. Baba Yaga watched him struggle, then sighed. Stay down, Kane. Kane ignored him. He was a soldier of the Empire. The Void Reapers did not surrender. He lunged one last time. A sharp impact. His body jerked. Then nothing. The pain came an instant later, searing through his torso. He looked down. The knife was buried deep just below the ribs, precisely placed. Not an instant kill. A slow one. Kane collapsed onto his back, his vision tunneling. His fingers twitched, instinctively reaching for the weapon he no longer had the strength to lift. Baba Yaga crouched beside him, tilting his head. You should have stayed home. Kane tried to speak, but the words drowned in the copper taste of blood. Baba Yaga stood, turning away, his figure already blending into the ruins. The last thing Kane saw before the darkness took him was the legend vanishing into the shadows. The silence in the Imperial War Chamber was suffocating. High Lord Vorton stood rigid before the vast holomap, his face a mask of cold fury. Around him, officers shifted uneasily, their usual arrogance tempered by the weight of failure. The operation on Erebus 9 was supposed to be routine, an execution, nothing more. Yet, Kane and his elite Void Reapers were gone, erased as if they had never existed. A single transmission had reached them before the link went dark. Garbled audio filled with static and broken screams. But one phrase had come through clear. "You should have stayed home." The meaning was unmistakable. Baba Yaga had sent a message carved in the blood of their best soldiers. The name, once whispered in disbelief, now carried the weight of inevitability. Vorten exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening behind his back. How many men did we lose? Grand strategist Harkin shifted uncomfortably. Kane's entire team, 11 of our finest. A pause. No bodies recovered. Vorten's eyes narrowed. No bodies. Harkin hesitated, knowing what that implied. No corpses meant no confirmation of death. No confirmation meant something far worse. An erasure, a complete dismantling of their presence. Baba Yaga hadn't just killed them. He had taken them. A soft chime signaled an incoming transmission. The holomap flickered, replaced by the grim face of Admiral Rithos, overseeing operations from the dreadnought Iron Veil. His expression was tight, controlled, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. "My lord," Rithos began, "we have a problem." Vorten's patience was razor-thin. "No, Admiral, we have a catastrophe." Rithos inclined his head slightly, but there was no disagreement in his eyes. "It's worse than we thought. Our surveillance probes detected movement beyond the Erebus 9 sector. Unregistered signals, shifting patterns. Someone's been watching us." Vorten's brow furrowed. "Baba Yaga?" A sharp nod. "Or someone working with him. We thought he was a lone operative, a ghost without an army. But if we were wrong..." The implications settled like a storm cloud over the room. The Empire had dismissed humanity as insignificant, a species too fragmented to be a real threat. They had assumed Baba Yaga was an anomaly. One man, however deadly, could not stand against an empire. But what if he wasn't alone? Vorten's voice was low, deadly. "Send a fleet." Harkin hesitated. "A full deployment." Vorten's gaze was ice. "We do not deploy against phantoms. We eradicate them." Rithos nodded. "The Iron Veil will lead the assault. We will burn Erebus 9 to its foundations." The decision was made. The Empire did not suffer defiance. They did not leave enemies behind to fester in the dark. If Baba Yaga had declared war, they would answer with fire. The fleet launched within the hour, a procession of warships cutting through the void, engines burning like cold stars against the abyss. The Iron Veil led the charge, its colossal form dwarfing the rest, a fortress of steel and destruction. Dozens of smaller vessels followed, their weapons primed, their purpose singular. As they neared Erebus 9, scanners pulsed outward, sweeping for signs of life. The planet loomed ahead, silent and still, its ruins untouched since Kane's ill-fated mission. Then an alert. Multiple heat signatures. Movement, but not on the planet. Above it, the realization struck like a thunderclap. They were not the hunters. They were the prey. A dozen warships materialized from the void, their hulls stripped of insignia, their origins unknown. Human vessels, but not imperial. No standardized formation, no rigid structure. These were predators born from conflict, shaped by war. Then a single transmission, unencrypted, unafraid, a voice calm, familiar. "You should have sent more." And then the slaughter began. The unknown fleet descended with ruthless efficiency. The first salvo tore through the Iron Veil's starboard flank, rupturing armor, igniting chain explosions along its length. The mighty dreadnought lurched, its shields struggling to compensate. The Imperial fleet scrambled to respond, but it was already too late. The enemy moved like wraiths, striking in coordinated waves, disabling engines, severing communication lines. Precision over brute force. Vorten watched in stunned silence from the war chamber as the fleet burned. Dozens of ships, each carrying thousands of soldiers, reduced to drifting wreckage. The Empire's might, crumbling before his eyes. This was not random. This was not rebellion. This was revenge. A final transmission, reached them before the link was severed. Baba Yaga's voice, low, unyielding. This is what happens when you mistake ghosts for men. Then darkness. Smoke coiled through the shattered remains of the Imperial fleet, the dying embers of once mighty warships flickering against the abyss. The wreckage of the Iron Veil hung in silence, its colossal frame torn open, leaking fire and bodies into the void. The Empire's pride, its unshakable dominance, had been reduced to a graveyard of metal and ash. Far below, on the surface of Erebus 9, Baba Yaga watched the ruins of the battle with cold detachment. He stood at the edge of a jagged ridge, his visor reflecting the distant fires in orbit. The war wasn't over, not yet, but the first lesson had been taught. The Empire had bled, and now it knew fear. Footsteps crunched against the dust behind him. A man approached, clad in scavenged armor, his face lined with the weight of survival. Former Imperial, once a soldier of the machine that had crushed worlds without hesitation. Now, he belonged to something else. Message came through from the outer colonies. The man said, "They heard what happened. They're rallying." Baba Yaga didn't respond immediately. He had expected this. Across the stars, the oppressed and forgotten were listening. The Empire's subjects, long forced into submission, had been given something more powerful than weapons or warships. Hope. They'll come for us, the man continued. Not just with fleets next time, with everything. Baba Yaga turned slightly, his voice calm. Good. Because the moment the Empire acknowledged a threat, it was already too late. The winds howled across the desolate surface, but in the distance, shapes moved against the dying light, figures emerging from the ruins, men and women who had once been scattered, leaderless. Now they stood together. The legend had been whispered in fear, spoken in hushed warnings among Imperial commanders. But now, it had become something else entirely. It had become a call to war. The galaxy would remember this day, and the legend of Baba Yaga would only grow.